It's been 8 years since the beginning of the financial crisis when the Federal Reserve enacted unprecedented policy measures. These were both widely praised and staunchly criticized. Joining us now is former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke, author of the new book, The Courage to Act, a memoir of a crisis and its aftermath. Welcome, Dr. Bernanke.
Nice to be here.
Do you miss being chairman of the Federal Reserve?
I do not. I love being a civilian. I'm happy when I open up the newspaper and I see a problem and I say, well, I hope somebody can do something about that. It's not going to be me.
So do you care about your legacy? I mean, you spent a lot of time writing this book. Is this something you're looking to
Well, you know, of course I do care about my legacy, and I think most people would. But I'm also, I think it's also important for us as a country to understand what happened. If people have the wrong understanding of what happened, they think it was purely a Wall Street bailout without any consequences for the broader American economy, they're going to make the wrong decision in the future when they come to some kind of crisis. So I think it's really important for us to understand what happened. And I do, I shouldn't admit this, but I actually put some economics in the book because I want people to understand what we were thinking and what the basic causes of the crisis were. So I felt it was important to lay that out, both for the future, so people, historians and others, can understand what happened. And also because the Fed, I think, needs to tell its story to offset some of the negative press that it's gotten.
You talk about economics. I know you're very data-driven, obviously, but how much does your gut come into play when you're making decisions, particularly in those dark moments?
Well, I try as much as possible to be as systematic, laying out the facts, laying out the analysis, hearing the staff's views, hearing other policymakers' views. There's a tendency to make errors when you make spontaneous decisions, and it's important to be as systematic as possible. And so I tried to do that. But in the end, sometimes it came down to, as you say, based on all your experience, based on your instinct, based on what you know, what's the right thing to do. And sometimes that was the deciding factor. But
what would be an example of when you did that?
Well, I knew, for example, in this AIG rescue that it was going to be terrible for the Fed. It was going to be politically very, very problematic. The Congress basically told me that they were not going to support this in any way and that the Fed was going to take all the responsibility. But I also knew, based on many years of study as a professor and my experience as a Fed chairman in the driver's seat there, so to speak, I was quite certain that the effects of letting the world's largest insurance company just collapse would be extraordinarily serious. And I didn't feel that that was a chance that we ought to take, that the country ought to take. And so in the end, I could have talked myself out of it, but I didn't. I felt that making that decision was the right one. I still think it was the right one. And, it came from both my rational thinking, but also my experience and my gut, as you put it.
Let's talk about the political race a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think you said you're a Republican, but the party had left you. I think I'm paraphrasing that accurately. Looking at all these candidates, first of all, are you surprised that there's so many candidates? And secondly, are there any candidates who are talking about the economy in a way that speaks to you?
Well, I think it's very early. I'm not working for any candidates. I haven't endorsed any candidates, so I'm not going to go there. I think what is most striking about the early stages of this race is the amount of support being received by outsiders, basically people outside the establishment, and it shows that the public still has is still unhappy with the Washington establishment, including the Federal Reserve and the management of the economy, which is something I think needs to get better. And I hope that whoever becomes president will take this very seriously, because the economy does need a broad-based effort to make it make it work better for the broad range of people in our society. So that the fact that there's so many supporters of the outside candidates really is indicative that there is dissatisfaction about the performance of the economy, and that's something that the Fed, but also Congress, the new administration, so on, really need to take very seriously.
So is it right to conclude that Donald Trump hasn't called you up to seek your advice?
That is correct. He has not called me, no.
Do you or other economists ever feel like Sisyphus? Maybe this is not quite the right metaphor, but bear with me. In other words, you keep learning more and more as you get older, and we have collective wisdom throughout the centuries about economics and markets and cycles, and yet we're never really able to solve the problems ultimately. Do we get better?
Well, you know, it's not like there hasn't been economic progress. I mean, we're much richer today than we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. I think we're better at managing the economy than we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. But ultimately, economics is about human society, and humans are very complicated creatures, and they're even more complicated when you have them interacting in the millions through markets and in other ways. So the idea that economics would ever be, you know, like physics, where you can pretty much predict how the moon is going to move around the Earth, is just not realistic. But it doesn't mean that there isn't useful knowledge to be had in economics and that economists have nothing to offer. I think economists do have a lot to offer, but they have to maintain reasonable humility as well, because clearly we're far from being a situation where economists can, you know, agree on specific policies that will solve all of our problems. So if we have appropriate humility, I think economics is still very helpful and should be taken seriously by the candidates and by people interested in our economy.
Dr. Ben Bernanke, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.